Hello, everybody. This is the All Metal Mode podcast, and you're listening to Mike Hare. As of right now, we don't have Dorian. We'll keep trying to get him in. I know he's been having phone issues where he's at, and I'm not quite sure what's going on with Dorian. I'm sure that there's some kind of internet issue or something here. I think we might have Dorian now, actually.
Hello.
Dorian, you made it.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike. I lost track of the time. You know, I'm running behind on my Dirt Digest article, and my office program was giving me fits today, and I was so concentrated on trying to finish that article, I lost track of the time. So my apologies to everybody.
Hey, Dorian, you have your webcam on, I think. Can you shut that off so we run smooth? If not, we'll have trouble.
Okay, let me see how to do it.
Okay.
All right, turn video off. I did it.
I'm so glad you made it. I told Dennis, I said, boy, he's going to really... I figured you were having internet issues or something.
I've been having those. Okay. No service at all for hours at a time.
Okay, I figured. But, well, let's get into it. Don't forget Dirt Digest Magazine. Check it out. Dorian's getting ready to submit his article. I'm so excited. If you have an article for Dirt Digest Magazine, get it sent over to me. Check out Dirt Digest Magazine on Facebook. There's also a contest this month for find submission. Go check it out at Dirt Digest Magazine on Facebook. And boy, I think that's all I have tonight. We'll get into it. Before we jump right in, though, I do want to say I've been talking to Dennis. I met Dennis through Dorian. Dorian told me about him. I think I reached out to Dennis. I'm not sure. Dennis reached out to me. What have we been talking, 6 months, Dennis?
Right at, yes.
And Dennis, it would put you in mind of Dorian with knowledge and storyteller and everything else. Well, Dennis and I went together last Thursday. We met up for the first time. We're less than an hour apart. I'm ashamed to admit that we haven't got together sooner, and I take full responsibility. I would say we kind of metal detected because I kept circling back. I'd circle out a little bit and then come back because I wanted to hear a good story. And he sure had them, man. He had them one after another. And there's particularly one, well, there's a bunch, but there's one I told him, there's some stuff he's not going to want to share, and I totally understand that, but there's one that I said, if you can share it, you got to tell it. And I'm looking for, it's a really good piece of advice. And we'll get into that later, but before we do that, Dennis, how long have you been metal detecting?
Well, hi, Dorian, by the way.
Yeah. Hello, Dennis. That was the first time I've heard your voice and since 1979. Do you realize that?
I thought of that today. I was looking back at the first International Treasure Hunting Society meet, and I think that was probably about the last time we actually chatted, was right in that time frame.
Probably was. I still remember
older.
I remember our first relic hunt at Mansfield, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Had a lot of fun. So
yep, we had a good time.
To answer your question, Mike, I started metal detecting way back in 1974. I think that was 2 years after Dorian started metal detecting, and I got hooked on it real fast. It took me just about 3 years before that I got interested in metal detectors and started looking at them, but I actually got started. I won a car, which I shared with you, Mike.
Yes, I was going to say, please.
Yeah. Well, that was 1974. I won a 240Z Datsun, which is the equivalent of a Nissan 380Z now, and local radio station actually gave that away, and I solved a riddle to get it. And the funny thing about it was, before I won the car, I knew I was going to win the car, and I know you and I have talked a little bit about that. Don't know how I knew, but I knew. And once I won that car, I kept it 6 months, and they had done a lot of work on it. It's a really nice vehicle, but I sold it after 6 months to a U.S. Air Force colonel, and I bought my first house with part of the proceeds with that, or as a down payment. And I had some money left over, and I thought, I really want to get something that will remind me of this time for the rest of my life. And amazingly, I chose to buy a good old Garrett DFO metal detector back in those days, the one with the 12-inch coil with the 5-inch coil inside.
Oh, yeah.
Flip back and forth. And I got to say that never in my dreams would it have evolved to have been this 46-year-old great hobby and passion that I have, as it indeed has become through the years. And so I've enjoyed metal detecting ever since 1974. And it probably took me, with that BFO, I bet it took me about probably a month and a half to find my very first coin. And they didn't discriminate back then with those machines. And when I did, I thought, oh my gosh, that people actually lose money. And it was a 1935 Buffalo nickel. And I was in love from that point on. And it's been a wild ride, brother.
Yeah.
That is cool.
Yeah, just about that time, Dennis D-Tex was coming out with the first BFO discriminator. And I got my hands on one of those. It cost all the money in the world. It was a whopping $100.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, but it found stuff, and
it did.
That's what it was all about. And back then, sites were still pretty virgin, more or less. And I tell people now, I hear a lot of folks talk about how, back in the old days, you found everything. Well, to a point, it's sort of correct, but there's still lots of virgin sites out there. You just got to be diligent and do some research and find the things, because they're still there. It just takes a little more effort than going to your local park and, digging up pull tabs and everything. And through the years, I've learned to specialize, so to speak, in country settings. I love hunting out in the country, where I still find old home sites in this area, Dorian, and Mike as well.
Oh, yeah.
I live just west of Fort Worth, about 20 miles. And one of the things I shared with Mike on our trip that we went on the other day was that where we were in Parker County, Texas, where I live now, and one county over in Palo Pinto County, that was the bleeding edge of civilization, where the Indians still struck regularly up until the late 1800s. I mean, it was still lots of massacres in there. In fact, one of the things Mike saw on the site that we went, what was it, Mike? A family that had been massacred by the Indians, basically.
Yes.
Hey, Dennis, let's comment on those Indians. They were Comanches, and they were every bit as fierce as the famed Apaches, the Cherokee Apaches and stuff. They
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. And Quanah Parker, we talked about that just a little bit. He was quite an Indian chief. And I told Mike of the story that Quanah Parker was the son of Cynthia Ann Parker. And she was a white woman that was captured by the Comanches when she was a young girl. And she ended up marrying one of the chiefs and had Quanah. And Quanah was quite an exceptional leader for the Comanche people in this area for years. And we even we talked about a story about Quanah and Little Bear, I believe was the gentleman's name, or the Indian's name, that they came into Fort Worth to do some negotiation with some traders, and they stayed in a hotel, and Little Bear at the end of the evening blew out a gas lamp in his hotel room, and it killed him. And Quanah Parker went into there later that night, and he survived, but barely. He awoke to the noxious aspect of that gas that was pouring through that gas lamp in that hotel room off of Exchange. And he survived, but barely, and he was extremely sick from it, which, of course, that's what happens with that kind of gas product. But anyway, they live. I've actually been on the site here in Parker County where Cynthia Ann Parker was kidnapped. And it's really kind of one of the biggest things I love about metal detecting in general is every single find that we have, as you gentlemen know, that's a piece of somebody's history. And that has always been the attractive part to my thinking, and made the passion in me, because on that site with her, I found a hair comb where she was, and it was a period hair comb. So you got to kind of wonder, did that come from Cynthia Ann Parker? Could it have? Yes, it could have. Did it? Don't know. But it was there on that piece of history and that land. And to me, that's one of the coolest aspects about our hobby as such, is we get to take that piece of history and preserve it for however long we have it, or a museum has it, or whatever. So metal detecting for me, it's done that ever since I first began. And I've had this passion that has carried through now for all these years. So
great. Yeah. Mike, can I jump in there a minute?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I want our listening audience to know a little bit more about Dennis, because Dennis has one of the most unusual resumes of anyone you would ever meet. Maybe the most unusual resume of anyone in metal detecting alive today. Dennis, would you mind telling us a little bit about what you have done through the years for a living and for service to your country and other people?
Sure. Well, thank you for that. I'm at the age of 19. I got on the Fort Worth Fire Department, and I served as a firefighter for 30 years with them, and I retired at the age of 49. But through those years, actually after Dorian and I went our separate ways through life, I ascended to the rank of, I was the commander of the communications division for the Fort Worth Fire Department, which was 911 dispatch and computer, telephones, radios, just communication in general. And one of the great things through my career for the first 16 years, I was out in the field. And so firemen, typically back then, we would work 1 day on, 2 days off. And what a great time that was for hunting and fishing and metal detecting. And truthfully, the metal, I'm a much better metal detector than I am a fisherman. I don't kiss my coins when I metal detect, but I have been known to kiss a bass or two. And anyway, though, the 2 days off, I was doing one of those three things, and the metal detecting just kind of took over through the years. And I'd get people to work for me, and I'd have 5 days off, and that was a little road trip here and there. And I've had the opportunity through those years early on to travel quite a bit, and did a little prospecting for gold, and a little prospecting for uranium, and I was assisting with the uranium. After I retired with the fire department, at the end of my career, I had 3 years of vacation and comp time and sick time saved up because I had to attend a lot of meetings. So I left when I was 46 and a half, and in 1999, and then I went on retired in 2002. When 2005 came along, Hurricane Katrina happened. And with that, I was bored, and it was just part of the experience that I got. I became an insurance adjuster, and I worked for Allstate, the Good Hands people, and gave away a lot of their money down in New Orleans. But my gosh, New Orleans was a ghost town, basically, at that time. And I would work, and somehow every week I would generally get in about 8 hours of metal detecting in New Orleans and the areas around New Orleans. And there are places there back then that it's just a great place to find stuff. I spent 6 months in New Orleans as an insurance adjuster. I left there, and that carries through to today. I do file examiner work generally from home when I do work files now. But the experience of associated with the metal detecting as a insurance adjuster is you almost always go to some of the oldest places in this country. And to me, again, that's an incredible thing. And a lot of adjusters play golf, and I do not. But they may have, 4 or 5 hours to do a round of golf, But if I've only got an hour, I'm still in the oldest places in America usually. And so I can go metal detect, and the introduction that I get to the insured people has always allowed me to detect in some amazing places. So in addition to doing the insurance work, because of my background with the fire service, I became a fire and explosion investigator. And it so happens in Texas that you have to be a licensed private investigator to do that. So I took on that role. After I'd done that for a while, a neighbor of mine he had a private investigator business, and he got me hooked up into insurance fraud and insurance investigation for insurance fraud and cargo theft and a lot of other things. And he really honed my ability to do investigative work, and that kind of ties into what we do.
Oh, yeah.
Metal detecting, big time. And so beyond that, I became, I was certified as a FEMA project specialist, doing public service, or not public service, public assistance for cities and towns. So I got the opportunity to do that, to meet a lot of the mayors and the city council people and representatives of the counties in hurricanes or large fires or anything like that, forest fires and such, here in the state. And again, I was placed in some of the oldest parts of the state, and meeting these people naturally, one of the key things that I did and still do is I was able to ask people, can you steer me on any of the older places here in this area where I might be able to get permission to metal detect? And amazingly, those folks, the county judges and the city and county officials would open up their doors quite readily because I was there to assist them. Then beyond that, I was certified doing environmental adjusting, which is basically you prevent a class action lawsuit. What we did in those, we settled with the people that were impacted by such things as the Veritas River in Coffeyville, Kansas comes to mind, where 87,000 gallons of crude oil came into the town by the Veritas River and flooded and destroyed 400 homes. And so we had to work and settle that. But again, that gave me that opportunity to go into an area, and it's virtually untouched, go anywhere I wanted because the people were not allowed back in due to EPA, but I was able to go and just run wild metal detecting. So that probably rounds out the working history that I've had. It's been a unique thing, and I'm one of those folks that at the end of the day, when the good Lord takes me off this world, I'm going to be able to look up and say, man, it was a heck of a ride, and it has been for me.
Yeah.
And every bit of that, Dorian, I know as you would attest, and you too, Mike, being able to research, especially once you get outside of old, the parks and inner city places, a lot of the folks in the Cowtown Treasure Club, I was one of the co-founders along with Joe Maynard. I'm sure you remember Joe, don't you? Yeah.
Joe was a fine man, He
was. He and I founded the Cowtown Treasure Club in 1979, and it's still alive and thriving to this day, which is amazing, and it has built up its membership. But one of the things that I think a lot of the guys do, and the ladies too, there is a lot of them hunt scrape lots and things of that nature. And when I do venture into a town, that's probably what I do with a really small coil, and I really don't go into towns much anymore. As we get up a little bit in age, I don't want to have to shoot anybody for trying to steal something from me because all the paperwork, And but I think that instead of that, that's where the research really comes in. And excuse me. And what I have found through the years is I started knocking on doors years ago, and that's been one of the most prolific methods I've found for looking either relic hunting, which that's probably my main thrust, and followed by coin hunting, and then probably followed by the cache hunting, which I know we're going to talk about that some as well. But the research is primary. Yeah, that's the best way to get information on where you want to go and what you want to find. So it's critical to me. So,
okay. All right. Let me
get the water.
Real quick, let me jump in real quick, Dorian. So I've got a completely hypothetical question here. Let's just say Dorian and I wanted to catch something on fire and not get in trouble. You could tell us how to do that, couldn't you?
I could, but I don't think I will. Thank you very much.
Wow, what a question.
When it's broadcast all over the internet. No.
Wow.
I'll be the one to hunt you
I'm
down.
only kidding. It would only be Dorian who would want to catch something on fire.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Oh,
you know why that? Yeah, I can see that in him. He used to back in Mansfield. Then again, I think you were doing it in Poison Spring, Dorian. He had a double hip mount from Garrett was putting out, and you remember that he had a big coil. When he swung the coil, I swear it was a 10-foot or more swing with him finding stuff. But he, can't complain because he was covering lots of ground. And the old adage of he who covers the most ground wins was absolutely true.
Hey, Dennis.
And, yeah.
Did you ever hear of my foray? By the way, that covered a 15-foot sweep. I had the box mounted on the shaft behind me. The box was actually behind my arm, and I had two handles on the stem, and I could swing with both handles. But you never heard the story of my hunt at Bentonville, North Carolina?
No.
Mike, may I?
Yes.
Okay. I think everybody will enjoy this. I was, of course, the dealer coordinator for Garrett. I was responsible for over 400 dealers before I left there. And I had a really good dealer named Ernie Curley down in North Carolina. And I've lost track of Ernie over the years. But Ernie called me up and he says, I got a problem. He says, I'm the president of the metal detecting club here. And he said, everybody uses whites. And he said, he was also our Garrett dealer. And he says, what can I do to get some of these guys buying Garretts? And I said, you got a Civil War site where we could put on a hunt and you tell them the Garrett man's coming down to challenge them. And he says, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, I do. He says, we've got permission on a big plowed field on the Bentonville battlefield, one of the last battles of the Civil War, major battles. And I said, that'll be perfect. And so I showed up with this machine Dennis is talking about. And there was, Count Ernie. Ernie had a Garrett, a Deep Seeker, and I had my modified Deep Seeker. Now, let me explain, too. The circuitry was in no way modified. It was a standard Garrett Deep Seeker of the day, but it was the shaft and the swing and the ground I could cover. That was what I modified. So I wasn't an electronics person. I couldn't build a circuit board, but I could figure out ways to make detectors balance better, and that way, if they balance better, you can swing them longer. Well, anyway,
Dorian, that actually got to that site about 5 minutes before you did, didn't it? The tip of your machine, I mean.
Well,
okay, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. We got out there, and there was 15 of us, and Ernie and I were, number 13 or 14 and 15, and so we had 13 guys out there with White's 5s. And you remember the old White's 5, Dennis?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That was, for a while, that was one of the major standard relic hunting machines, and
yes,
a lot of relics were found with them. They weren't a bad detector now, so I'm not putting down the machine. But what these people were, they were really excited about whomping the Garrett man. And so I showed up and I got out this big machine and assembled it. And Dennis, they laughed me to scorn right there. But before we started swinging. Oh, they had a great time at my expense, and I looked at Ernie and smiled and winked, and because he didn't know what was going to happen. I hadn't told him what I'd be doing. So we started the hunt right on I think of like 8 o'clock in the morning or something, and we hunted all day. And I mean, like we took 5-10 minutes to eat a snack and right back at it. And everybody was out there determined, to, like I said, make me look bad. And at the end of the day, the 15 of us had found a total of 48 Civil War artifacts. Anybody want to guess how many I had of that total? I had 42.
Wow. and I'm sure that a lot of that was because of such a wide sweep that you were making.
Yes, yes. But
it's amazing. It really was. And to see him do that, I got to admit, I was envious. Now, at the end of the day, he looked a lot like Popeye on that right arm. Just saying.
Hey, Dennis, the footnote on that story, I got a call from Ernie near the end of the following week after I went back to Texas. And he says, I sold 7 Deep Seekers this week. Because, human nature. And the pride of those fellows would not let them admit that I was a better detectorist. So it had to be my detector. So they just simply traded in their whites for the Garretts.
Wow.
Which was
That's
okay.
A great story.
Okay with me. Yeah, it was one of those memories, that I kind of treasure. It was fun. And,
well, sure. The funny thing is, and it really kind of parallels, and when I won that car I referenced earlier, the primary reason I won that car was because I thought outside of the box a little bit. And on the day that they advised me I had won the radio station, they toyed with me for 10 minutes, by the way. But on the day I won it, I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and there were 2 entries on the 5th Z, and that was the thing, was finding the location with the Z in it. And the 5th location was nobody could get. But I got up at 6 in the morning and went to that radio station and handed a janitor the 2 envelopes with my entries and put on their Mystery Z contest, which is the name of it. And I asked him to put the time down. And what occurred was I beat everybody else getting there to that spot. I got there before they did, before email, or not email, but regular mail, special delivery, or anything else that they were willing to take. And so I beat everybody to the punch, because I thought outside the box.
There you go.
The same thing really occurred, but what you did was so innovative, and I've never seen anybody else do that to this day, all these years later. But what you did was you went to them, and your skills were great back then, but you thought outside the box and made something happen that, to my knowledge, no one else did. And that long sweep like that, Yep. It took you 30 minutes to get up to where you're pinpointed, but other than that, that long sweep, that makes a big difference, especially in a field environment. It's just amazing. And I think back to that. I've told several people of the story where you found that Hotchkiss shell. I was with you, and I think that was at Poison Spring. But I could be wrong.
It was. No, you're right.
You're
right.
Yeah, and it still had the lead around it on the base. And yeah, I think you had that machine there too. And he'd take off, Mike, Dorian would take off, and I'd see him about an hour later. He had a long stride to begin with, and he just zoomed off, and it's like a drag race, but he had that big coverage coil on the end of that, fly rod thing that went out 30 feet, and he just had that 15-foot swing. I did not know how much it was, Dorian, but I knew that was something else, and I was amazed.
We measured it, so we knew exactly, and that was the whole key at Bentonville. I just covered so much more ground than they were, and they had the 8-inch coils, and I had the 14, so I was going deeper. Mm-hmm. I got the deep artifacts. And I got more of them. Basically, the reason why it was so lopsided was I was getting artifacts they couldn't pick up with the 8-inch coil.
Sure. But again, that is just thinking ahead and planning out. It points to preparation for any kind of hunt that you do, and that includes the research. In this case, is more the actual use of the machine itself. But You realize right now, I don't know how many people are listening to us, but somewhere in America, there's somebody trying to figure out, okay, how can I add 3 more shafts to this thing and make it work?
Tell them you got to put vertical handles on the shaft that they can grab with both hands.
Yeah. But what an amazing adventure that was back in those days, and still is.
Oh yeah. There was always a new horizon. There was always a new goal, something new to conquer in terms of metal detecting goals. Trying to figure out ways to find things on your bucket list. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, and that there again, it's the research side, and then thinking outside the box of what was it like 100, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dennis, I've had the opportunity to make 3 trips to Scotland, and I did some metal detecting, did pretty good over there. I got some really old coins. But I discovered a mystery. In 84 A.D., a Roman general named Agricola decided to invade Scotland and conquer the Scots, who had never been conquered. And the Scots were basically 5 separate tribes that were fighting and bickering with each other. And Agricola set out up the east coast of Scotland on the plains, and with an army of 20,000 veteran legionnaires. And the Scots, for the first time ever in their history, united, all 5 tribes united, and they brought an army of 30,000 against him. And they had those chariots like you saw in Ben-Hur with the knives sticking out the side,
Mm-hmm.
And Agricola had a fleet of ships right off, almost within sight of where the battle was fought. And he stood on a little hill and watched the battle. And his son-in-law was a fellow named Tacitus. He was the only recorder of the history of the battle. And he says that the Roman legions killed 10,000 of the 30,000 that came against them, and the rest retreated. And they said their losses were less than 200. Now, if their losses were less than 200 and Agricola's goal was to conquer Scotland, and he had a whole fleet of ships with supplies and extra arms, swords, shields, things like that, and he only lost 200 men, why did he immediately turn around and hightail it back to England and cancel his whole campaign? Obviously, the Scots did a number on him. Well, the English archaeologists have looked. It was fought in what's called the Grampian Mountains. And in the Latin, it was called the Battle of Mons Graupius. And the archaeologists have looked for the site for over 300 years and haven't been able to find it. And they still haven't found it. I looked at it, and like you said, by thinking out of the box, I found the battle site of Mons Graupius in 2 hours. Took me just 2 hours to find it. They were hunting for it 50 miles too far north. And I figured that was why that nobody could find it up there near Aberdeen where they were hunting, because it's not where it was fought. So I looked south, and I even found the Scots set up a big standing stone to mark the battle site right in the plains of Dundee, Scotland. And there's a little hill in Dundee, and that's where Agricola, I'm sure, stood on that hill and watched the battle. Anyway, amen on thinking out of the box, brother. And any more examples you got, any tips on thinking out of the box you can share with us, we'd love to have them.
Excuse me, I had a coughing fit right there.
I was like, it went quiet for a second.
Well, it did. And my wife swears up and down I've talked to a wall. So I don't know what that means, but she claims it all the time. Social butterfly or something like that. But, here a couple of podcasts ago, you were talking just along those lines about what the soldiers during the battle, when they were in full retreat, what would they do? They'd throw stuff off to the side. And then that gentleman, I don't remember who it was, I commented on it on the online, found that musket over off the side of a hill.
Gary Persinger, yeah.
That's who it was. Hi, Gary, if you're there. And what you did right then is you introduced to the people perhaps that weren't used to doing that very concept to think through any kind of place that you're looking for and how it looked back then, or what they might have been doing. And it really, if you look at any kind of a battle, it makes sense that the less weight that I carry, the faster I'm going to move. And it's just a natural human sort of impulse, if you will. Get rid of that heavy stuff as you're getting out of there and retreat. And I think what you did was you introduced that perhaps to some folks that don't necessarily have that history of thinking outside the box. I would credit my mentor when I got into doing investigative work to look at anything. And as you're investigating, to read through and delve further to find any new evidence that's credible. I know one of the things that we were going to talk about, and I'll go into a little bit of depth, is that current, I'm looking for gold coin cash, y'all. And what occurred, what actually tripped me to it, I can say, I'm kind of bound up by a non-disclosure agreement, but I can say this, that what actually gave me the location of where that gold, I believe, is, it withstood 160 years is what it's withstood, but it's because the family has held on about 10,000 acres of land here in Texas, and they insisted it was in one part. And I went to a local library in a local county here, and after I researched newspapers going back online and offline, read books, and this has gone on for 4 years, I finally asked a 82-year-old librarian, do you have anything else in your library here that has to do with these people? And she said, you know, it's funny. As a matter of fact, I was in the basement the other day, about 2 weeks ago, and I found a box of old letters from that family. And I said, all right, would you mind if I read them? And she said, yeah. And that simple thing, how serendipitous, if you will, but amazingly, when I read those letters, there was a letter that 26 years after the gold was buried, there was a letter from the daughter-in-law, the guy that buried it, to her daughter, and she named the piece of property where the son believed the gold would be buried. And that was the big deal, is the guy that buried the gold did not even share with his family where it was buried, because I'm sure he was concerned they might be tortured or something. But he gave hints from, I found and there was like 40 different letters in this package in the basement. And I learned a lot more about them, but the daughter-in-law named the piece of property, and that enabled me to go to the courthouse and get through the tax records and go through things and find out exactly where this was on a plat map. And then, of course, you know, people had to be really close to a water source, and especially back in the 1860s and 1850s and 70s, and back in those times, they either dug a hand-dug well or they were by a nearby water source. And so I was able to go to the property owners now, and I have not secured permission as of yet, but I did do a flyover with the drone. I have not done the flyover with a thermal camera, but I located just with a regular drone right after daybreak, about probably 20 minutes, which that's the best time to fly with natural light and a natural camera instead of the thermal or whatever. And I was able to locate where the cabin was on that property. And so that narrows it down even further. And, you know, a great majority of caches are buried within eyesight of where someone lived back in those days for very reason. They didn't want to let somebody sneak up and get it. But my point is that thinking outside of the box, and here's how simple that is sometimes. I asked a total stranger at 82-year-old grandma, you know, do you have anything else? Or, you know, basically, is there anything else you can tell me about this particular gold hoard? And she said yes, to everyone's surprise, including me. I mean, I'm probably one of the first people, if not the first, that actually asked someone about that, and 2 weeks before, she had actually run into it. So that's where thinking outside the box helps in that instance. And whether I ever find that gold or not, I don't know. But I'm much, much closer than anybody else has been through the years. And I can't there is a really good reason why no one zeroed in on this gold hoard, and that is because the way that the guy that buried it died, everybody focused on him, and his death in this area and in the history books and everything, and that throws everybody off. And it's just, and the way I came about that was door knocking with a friend of mine that we go hunting about once a month, somewhere between here and the Oklahoma border. We'll meet up and go door knock just for fun, And it came about, we were metal detecting in a plowed field, and the next door neighbor, the farmer next to it, walked up and started talking about wanting to know what metal detectors would do and would they find gold and how deep and all that. And it was just like, having done this so long, I knew he had something going on. And so I asked him, and I had never heard of this part of this money or treasure that he had mentioned. And so once I did research, there was back in the early 1900s, it was actually in several history books. But when you research the guy that I can't say his name, but when you research him, that's what pops up is the old stuff, how he was killed. And it's just, it threw everybody off and got them focused on that. But again, just kind of like the 82-year-old woman, I ran into this guy doing something not treasure hunting or cache hunting, but it was totally out of the clear blue sky that this guy walks up and engages us in conversation about it. And when I research now, and this is kind of a key thing in my experience, it doesn't matter where I go, and I learned this with Katrina more than anywhere else. I've done it before, but when I used to go up and I would purposefully hunt out old home sites, and I'd go up and talk to the owner. But nowadays, when I'm somewhere, whether I'm on a scene of a great big hurricane or I'm just out talking to people, if I find an older person, I'll ask them, do you know of any treasure stories in the area? Do you know of any people that died suddenly that might have had buried money or something, or any kind of a bank robbery in this area? Just things like that. And it amazes me how many stories you come across. And I know Dorian, several, again, I just referenced back several of the podcasts, you made a comment that most treasure hunters that are out there actively seeking caches of gold or coins or whatever, that they generally keep several stories at one time, and as one lead is added to, they focus on that for a time. Well, I'm kind of that way. Through 46 years, I've kept notebooks of every county in the state of Texas, or 252 counties. And every time that I find something of interest in those counties, I put it in that notebook. It's just a three-hole binder notebook. But as I find out anything about those counties, I put it in. Some of them are treasure stories, buried caches. Some of them are battlegrounds. Some of them are Indian fights or Indian massacres or what have you. But to me, excuse me, it's really been a great method for me to exercise my metal detecting muscle, because it allows me to have a firm paper record of the things I've done for 46 years. And it has assisted me incredibly in having opportunities when I go traveling or something. If I'm going to go through this county, I've got that book on hand. And I know you guys are, Dorian, I don't know if you know, but you've probably seen, or we've talked a little bit about my private Google map that I produced, basically based on all those books and all the research.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And on that, out of that map, it actually dawned on me that I am never going to find or be able to go to each and every place that I have records of. So that actually prompted the writing of the book that I've authored. There's another thing I guess I've done. And it is not in print right now. It's called 2,700 Historical Sites Across Texas. And me and Amazon, the book on 8x10 paper, it comprises about 1,250 pages. So it's a large volume of work.
Wow.
And what it is it's a result of all those years and all those people I've talked to, and plus research in the old newspapers and the archives and different books. And I've got latitude and longitude coordinates in decimal format. And on every side, on both the map as well as the book, I had a historical blurb about what was happened here in its crossings, its springs, its battlegrounds, its old port sites, old mission sites, historical people that live there, just ferry sites. I mean, there's about probably 14 different types of sites. And on the map, I color-coded them and used lettering and colors to differentiate basically what they were. But in the book, I found that I did it by county in the book. And what happened, the oldest place in that book was sited back in the 1500s in Texas. It was a Spanish place over by Nacogdoches. And Nacogdoches is the oldest place here in Texas, the oldest town or city. And so what occurred, Amazon, this was a $39.95 product, which I think was a very fair price.
Oh, yeah, for that much.
Book.
Wow.
Yeah, and they came back after a year and said, we want you to go back and put in your references when every single person that you quoted or did a citation on, when they died. And I'm like, there's thousands of those throughout that book. Yeah. And so out of those sales of $39.95, I was seeing, after everything was said and done, roughly $7. And you wouldn't think that, but that's what happened with Amazon and all their stuff. So I said, I'm going to pull the book, and I did. And so I'm just completely rewriting the book now. I'm worked on it a little bit today. I'm about a third of the way through the letter M in counties, but it's getting out, and especially the young folks listening, and writing down and doing even as far as what I went, and create notebooks for the areas around you, and just keep on adding to it. And over time, all those treasure leads, whether it's holding 10 treasures, and I don't even know how many I've got listed, but when they do come up, I add to them. And that's just a great way of having it. So when you go to a county, you've got that 3-ring notebook. And that, to me, it's worked well for me, So,
yeah. Hey, Dennis,
you
ought to think about dividing that book up into 4 parts, 300 pages per part, and have volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, and volume 4. Remember the old 10-volume set of treasure hunting books that covered all the states? Used to be real popular.
Yep.
Man, that guy sold a lot of books.
he did, and I've actually I've got that on the plate. I've almost did it before, and to go back to Amazon, what they did is I had given them, when we first started talking and going through, one of the people I was going through, I gave him the sites and the latitude and longitude coordinates, and they published that in place of the real book, which irritated me unbelievably. And what I tried to give to people, I'll never get to those sites, but I wanted to give people a good value for what they were spending for that kind of research material, And it's just, you're right. I thought about doing in 2 volumes. I hadn't considered 4, but that's not a bad idea at all. It really would make it more manageable inside.
Yeah.
That way I could do the printed version as well.
Let's talk. I've published 5 books so far, and
right.
I want to let's talk privately about that, and because my printer will print 1 copy or 10 or 20 or 500, whatever I tell him to, he will print. In small quantities, big quantities. I drop off a flash drive with a book on it, and he takes it from there, and he's doing a beautiful job. Has state-of-the-art equipment, and his prices were like almost 45% lower than anybody else. So we'll talk.
We'll talk.
I'd love to have your book. I'll buy all 4 volumes if you do it.
Well, all right, brother. We can do a trade. We
All
books
right.
for books, you know.
Yeah.
Mike, are you still with us?
Yeah, I sure am. And I want to jump in, but you guys are going back and forth. I don't want to interrupt too much, but I do want to say this. You were talking about, looking at a site and thinking about how it looked back then. I feel like I'm really good at that. I feel like I've got a knack for that, at least over a lot of people I've detected with. But when I was out with you, I don't even know, and I've kind of thought about it since that day. Would I have caught that or not? And I don't want to go into detail because I don't want to give the site up. I don't know if it would possibly give it up. But you pointed something out to me that I don't think I would have realized. And it's kind of a big point to that site. And you just, you knew it. You hit it right on the head. And I thought, wow, wouldn't have thought of that. But so, yeah, you're really good at that. Without a doubt, I seen that firsthand. And I thought that was really cool.
Well, you see there, Mike. The hidden agenda here is, you're already king of the field hunters. So what we're going to do is turn you over to Dennis, so we can turn you from a field hunter to a treasure hunter.
Right. Well, I don't claim to be king of anything, but I've been detecting half as long as you guys, and I think all of our success is because we love to learn. And Dorian, so many people, I've had people, Dennis, reach out to me since he's been on the show and been like, I remember back in 74 I met him. That guy has so much knowledge and stuff. But yet Dorian is always excited to learn like I am. And Dorian's taught me a lot. And I'll tell you what was really neat to me, Dennis, is one area that Dorian lacks is the latest technology and what's going on with metal detectors. And we've had a couple conversations, and how it's hard to get Dorian to stop talking. Firsthand.
He just walks away from me in the field. I can get beyond my ear hearing, and he was gone. So that was effectively stopping. But yeah,
but he's a talker, and I love it. I'm giving him a hard time, but that guy was silent when I started talking about the different detectors and what's out there and what I like and why I like it. At what? How old are you? 71, 72, Dorian?
Yeah, 72.
At 72.
How'd that happen, by the way?
What's that? What'd you say, Dennis?
Oh, I was just being flippant. How did that happen? When I saw your picture and when he reached out to me, Mike, Facebook recommended me as a friend, didn't it, Dorian?
Yep.
And I thought that movie or TV show God Friended Me, and I kept thinking, okay, he's gonna come back in my life and steer me to this long handled metal detector where I can sweep 15 feet. Then I realized I was too short for that to happen, so that went out the door. But it's Dorian's always been knowledgeable. And right now, he's talking quite a bit about the Knights of the Golden Circle stuff. Well, I'm going to tell you, back in 1975, 76, 77, 78, somewhere in there, that when I'd see Dorian, he would give me cassettes on different folks like Trilateral Commission, the Illuminati, and I'm like, oh, come on, seriously, But I was getting these cassettes from this guy, and I started listening to him. And right now today, all that stuff that I read back in the day, I'm seeing a lot of it as being a solid truth from this guy.
Hey,
and
Dennis,
so he's always been well read. Yes, sir.
That the man that made those tapes that you listened to was a good friend of mine. He and I were both from the same hometown of Huntington, West Virginia. He was murdered by 2 forms of poison in 1987 to keep him quiet.
Wow. See, that's why I left you alone, because I was afraid you were going to get me killed by the Illuminati.
Well, if you tried to open that big KGC cache in Salado, Texas, you would have been.
Probably so.
I came mighty near to it.
No,
Mike, you were headed down the pathway. Go ahead.
I was just trying to make the point. I'd never heard Dorian stop talking for so long when I started talking metal detectors, and he just was absorbing it. And I loved that. I loved that I was able to share something, and because I don't think there's anything metal detecting I've shared with Dorian where he's been like, "Oh, that's a great tip. I never done that or thought of that or heard that," because he's been doing it for too long. But to be able to share my knowledge on the detectors has been a really neat experience.
Absolutely.
Mike, I'll be the first one. I think, Dennis, you'll back me up on this. There's not a person out there, I don't care if they bought their metal detector last week. If I can sit down with them or go out in the field with them, talk to them, hunt with them, I'm going to learn something from them. Yeah. I don't care how new they are or how many years they've had in the field. Everybody's got something to teach somebody else. The big thing is if you haven't become a legend in your own mind and you're humble enough to let a newbie teach you something. Of course, Mike's not a newbie, but you know how it is, Dennis. He's only got half the years that we do, so I guess we could call him a half pint, a half there. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, the big thing is, like I said, just don't become a legend in your own mind. If you do pick up some information and knowledge, share what you've got, and hopefully the people that you run with will share what they've got, and everybody comes out better because of it.
Yeah. And
in fact, go on, Mike.
I was just going to say real quick, I you see it less because we have YouTube and all this information out there, but you still see it. You have somebody come into the hobby with a fresh set of eyes that haven't, I don't know the right word, they haven't been influenced by a bunch of detectors, so they have their own way of approaching it. And the next thing you know, somebody that's been metal detecting 6 months is teaching you things. Yep. And it's like, wow, that's really interesting. That's happened to me several times. So it doesn't always mean how long you've been detecting, but somebody like you or Dennis do have more to offer. Like I told the story, the first conversation we ever had, we talked on the phone a few hours, and you taught me 3 things that I had never thought about in a very short time. Although that conversation was a few hours, I think it was the first half an hour. And I was just blown away. There is something to be said about experience. And that's it right there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is. I started hunting with a guy that's been hunting 2 years. He's close to my age. And he hunts with an XP Deus. And he hunts Civil War relics. Invited me to come hunt a permission down at Perryville, Kentucky. And we got in the field, and he said, "Don't expect to come down here and find a lot of artifacts." He said, this field's been hunted to death for 30 years. He says, "You'll be lucky to find 1 or 2 artifacts for a day's hunt." And I told him, I said, "You're setting your goals too low." I said, "My goal is 20. And he laughed at me. He says, "You're crazy." I said, "Well, let's see what we can do." So he said, "Would you mind going on the other side of the field? I want to hunt this side over here." I said, "No problem. I want to hunt that other side anyway." Because I knew more. He hadn't researched the battle, and I knew on the other side of that field where the barbed wire fence is, that was a stone and rail fence at the time of the battle, and there was 3 regiments of Tennessee Confederates behind that wall throwing as much lead as they possibly could and getting pounded to pieces by artillery. So I wanted to hunt that side, so that was perfect. And I immediately started finding artifacts. And so we finally hooked up about noon, kind of in the middle on one end of this field, which had a valley in the middle. And he says, "Well, did you find anything?" He says, "It looked like you were doing a lot of digging." I said, "I got a few things." And he says, "Well, I haven't found anything." They ain't hunted half a day. He said, "What do you got?" And I said, "Well, I got 12 minis and pieces of cannonball." And he couldn't believe it. He was shocked. And so we hunted close. He wanted to hunt close to me then. And I pulled out another 6. I didn't get my 20, but I got 18 artifacts. And he ended up with, I think, 4 for the day. But he was saying, "I don't understand how you can do that." He says, "My detector's more expensive, a lot more than your Garrett AT Pro, And he says, I don't see how you can find that many more than me. I said, John, it's not your detector. He says, what do you mean?
Yep.
I said, you're taking 10 to 15 minutes to dig a target. I have my target out of the ground and in my pouch within 2 minutes. I said, I'm finding more stuff because I'm swinging more than you are.
Yep.
You know, he finally learned it. And you know what happened when he finally learned that? Not to dig a foxhole to recover a mini ball. He started finding, he went up to 10, 12 artifacts a day, and then he got up to where he can give me a run for my money now with his XP Deus. But he can do it because, you know, he was fortunate enough to hunt with somebody that saw what he was doing wrong.
Absolutely. And just a question for you, Dorian.
Sure.
How did you know to search that particular part of the field that y'all were at? How did you come across knowing what he was?
Very, very good, Dennis. I had researched the battle, and all he had done was get a general idea of the outlines of the battle. He knew which properties had been battlefield, but he knew nothing about which troops had been entrenched where, you know, just how intense did the battle get. He knew just a few basic details, and of course, I went on to write a book on the Perryville battle. You know, and it's all full of details that most people don't even know. But, Dennis, it was research. The difference between... Go ahead.
Right. Well, and that was exactly what I felt like listening to you. Knew it would be the case because that's all about researching whatever you're looking for and figuring out every detail that you can possibly glean from whatever information that is out there. I have the president of our club has now found, I don't even know where he's going. It's in Arkansas, but he's found 3 Allen shells out there, artillery rounds. And I told him, I said, you know, wherever you're finding it, he's plotting them on GPS, which I think that's a great thing, especially for relic hunters to do, is to do that when they come across campsites or, in this case, artillery. And I said, you know, I can send you the ballistics for those artillery rounds and look and see. And once you figure out where they were firing from, you should have an arced area that you should really focus on and find, you know, more than the 3 even, and they're there.
And the overshoot area. Uh-huh.
Yeah, exactly. And it's out there. And one of the things, in fact, I'm sitting here at my computer desk right now, and I don't know how many people do this. I'm going to mention 2 things I do. I do it with Google Earth, and I also do it with from like historic aerials. I don't mind spending money when I'm working on certain projects to get a high definition aerial image, right?
Right.
Right now, I'm sitting in front of a 65-inch monitor at this point in time, and that it allows me to get really good definition, especially on the high resolution. Not so much on Google Earth, but I can get high resolution images, and I can come down pretty close and still have really good images on this big monitor. And believe it or not, that really makes a big difference on what I'm looking for. Maybe not even so much with that, but one of the things Mike and I talked about, and Thursday I've got to bleed off my drone, but I fly a drone that's it's a commercial drone. It's a DJI Inspire 1, what's called version 2, and underneath that, beyond the standard camera, I have a FLIR high-resolution thermal camera, and then I also have a red eye hyperspatial camera, which is similar, but it doesn't do the temperature right. Yeah.
You're going to have to back up and just do a little more explanation. Tell everybody what FLIR stands for. It's an acronym.
Oh, good Lord. Don't ask me that. You'll have
really?
I'm
sorry.
It stands for magic is what it stands for. But
all right.
Go ahead.
All right.
Forward-looking something.
Forward-looking infrared radar, is it?
No, it's...
but it is forward-looking infrared.
Yeah. Infrared radiometer, something about that.
Okay, yeah.
Or whatever. But as I said, it's magic. Well, here's
that other
thing.
thing you talked about. It sounded like you found that one on the Starship Enterprise. Something hyperspatial.
Yeah, I guess it does, doesn't it? It puts you there. What it does is it operates from near infrared through the ultraviolet spectrum, and so you look at, and you can red, blue, green spectrum, and so you can do analysis of the different spectrums with that camera and the result. But what I was going to share, because this large monitor, when I do a flyover, typically in this part of the world where I live and out in the country where I primarily hunt, I do flyovers at about 40 feet or so altitude above the ground. And what that gives me with that thermal imaging camera is I get sub 1/4 inch resolution per dot on my display. And so that's really high resolution. And when you're looking in the thermal mode with it, Mike and I were talking about that a couple of weeks ago, I think. Some people advocate going 30 minutes before or 30 minutes after sunup. And in the regular spectrum, you get a lot of shadows that will show you things. But I prefer personally with the thermal imaging camera, I like to fly about a 30 minutes to an hour after dark, because and in the summer. And that lets everything heat up during the day. And what you're looking for is the heat signature, say for the log cabins that are on the site he and I were on. What will happen is where you've got the cornerstones for a cabin, or even the logs of the cabin, it's going to compress the soil beneath them, and that's going to give a different heat signature over time. And you'll see the hearthstones, and as well as the doorstone or the doorstep. And back in, I shared this with Mike here again a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about that, and in 1968, I got turned on to infrared camera film, and Kodak had images. I believe it's in South Dakota, of a Viking settlement there, and in a plowed field, and you could still see the 6-foot thick walls that were there and everything about it. Now, whether or not it's Viking, I don't know, but that's what they said in this magazine, or not a magazine, but like a manual for their infrared film. And I'm like, oh my God, they can actually see that kind of stuff. Well, indeed they can. And when I got my hands on this thermal camera, I started doing flyovers, and, a lot of times they use it looking for people that are lost and everything. But I talked to several professors across the United States, and they kind of shared with me how to get the best results out of it, because they've been looking for archaeological finds. One professor's name eludes me, but he's up in Bowling Green, Ohio, and he not only talked me into operating the thermal camera, the FLIR camera. It's a ViewPro Plus R, which is a high resolution version. And I get video feed in real time with up to about 2 miles. But what he shared with me also, and this is really something that has a lot of value to me. We got talking about a differential magnetometer slung up underneath a drone, and what he was telling me is that I would have to upsize my drone, but they've got differential magnetometers now that are at about 3.2 kilograms in weight. And so you can fly those birds, and on archaeological sites, and Dorian, you may have had that experience overseas, but they're flying them at about 1 meter above the ground. So, 39 inches or so. Yeah. And I got to questioning. He was talking about finding ancient sites. And so because it's a magnetometer, my initial thoughts, okay, if I were to go to a battleground, say I was to see a 4-inch diameter shell that was 10 inches long, about how deep would I be able to see it? He said probably about 2.5 to 3 foot deep with that. And I said, what about a rifle barrel? Yeah, just say a 50 caliber rifle barrel. He's probably about 2 feet. And I said, okay. I said, what about, a pistol? 1.5 foot. And the beautiful part about this conversation we're talking about right now, and perhaps someone out there that has the money wants to go do this, the beautiful part about it is you're flying that magnetometer, differential magnetometer, which kind of like the doing ground ground balancing, it's giving a value to the matrix of the ground, and then everything that pops up is above that matrix. And so it's seeing it, as long as it's metallic, if you will. But the beauty about it is the whole time, if you go out on the field, the drones are sophisticated enough now that you can tell it, I want to go from point A to point B, move over 15 feet, go to point C and D, move over and cover a field. I've got 4 batteries. I can do probably 40 acres or so at a time. And what that gets you, though, is you will actually get, with the right program, the GPS coordinates for any find that you have, and you can literally walk up to it. And that takes us into a whole nother direction, right? But it's an incredible value if you're looking at a field where a battle took place, because a lot of the artifacts that we look for, metal detecting, are the metallic artillery shells or the rifle barrels or whatever, you know. So it's a valuable tool, and it, to me, it falls under the wide encompassing umbrella of metal detecting. It's just another tool to me, but it's amazing. And I would bet that not a lot of folks even realize that kind of stuff's out there, and it is. So that's a project down the road.
Well, I'd like to say to our listening audience, you are listening to a professional treasure hunter. So you want to see the difference between the guy that goes out or the girl that goes out and plays with their metal detector for an hour or two on the weekend and a professional treasure hunter. You're seeing the difference tonight.
Dory and I was laughing a while ago. Y'all were talking about a legend in their own mind. And what did y'all do to me before this happened? A Texas legend, Mike. Isn't that right? A Texas legend. There are people from Cowtown Treasure Club that are laughing. Not that fat old man. What's wrong with a prophet is never loved in his own hometown, is he?
That's right. That's right, yeah.
But you know, it's funny. I want to tell a little quick story right here, because it really, I dropped below the radar back in, I guess it's about 1983, 84, after the club got started. And this happens, it's another aspect of treasure hunting that you really got to be aware of, about talking about them or anything. Well, word got out that I knew theoretically where a particular hoard of silver coins that was buried. And I actually had a guy threaten to kill my family if I did not give him everything I had.
Oh, man.
And I'm like,
wow.
You know, you got to be kidding me, dude. And he made phone calls. Well, in those days, I went to the Fort Worth police, and I said, this has happened, you know. And unfortunately, back in those days, they couldn't trace it like they can now. And so it went on, and it got worse and worse. And I talked, Joe Maynard and I sat down, and we talked, and I said, you know, I've got to go low profile and drop out of the radar. And so we concocted a story that I had actually found a treasure. Now, I'm a Fort Worth firefighter during this time, right? 24 on, 48 off. So we concocted a story that I found a treasure, and I left the country. And I dropped out from the club for quite a few years, actually. And what's funny about it, I think it was 84 when this occurred. And so I kind of dropped out of sight. I kept metal detecting. I had 2 close friends that I'd hunt with, and I'd already figured out they weren't the bad guys. And so I rocked along, and it's just an aspect. You always need to be extremely cautious about what you tell folks. If you're actually looking for stuff like that, it's okay to ask questions about, you know, what can you tell me to strangers? And, you know, as long as they don't get the idea that you've got all these treasures possibly located. Talk on the national podcast that you've got this huge book full of that stuff. For those of you who might, I'm completely armed, by the way, so y'all watch out if you do come over here. And anyway, but here's the magnitude of what those stories do. In 84, I dropped out. 2004, I added on to my existing house for my in-laws to come live with me, and I need this electric part. And so I'll go into Fort Worth, Texas, and I tell them I need this part. There's a guy behind the counter, and there's a customer that's in front of it. And how this happened was the customer said, "Hey, my friend has been working down in San Antonio, and they were on a construction site. He went with a bulldozer, and they uncovered some Spanish gold coins." And, of course, my ears picked up because I can hear him. And so after this guy leaves, I go to the service rep behind the counter, and I said, "Hey, I happen to be overhearing y'all, and he found some Spanish gold, it sounds like, and down in San Antonio." He said, "Yeah." And he showed me a picture that he had, the guy had given him, Polaroid. And he said, "Isn't that impressive?" I said, "Yeah." And I introduced myself to this guy behind the counter. I said, "I'm Dennis Wynne, and I've been metal detecting for a little bit of time, through the years now, since 74. He said, "What is your name again?" And I said, "Dennis Wynne." He said, "Are you the same guy that founded the Cowtown Treasure Club?" I said, "Yes, I am, along with Joe Maynard." He said, "My God," he said, "you're a legend." I said, "What?" He said, "We talked about you and that club because you found a treasure and left the country." I said, "Do what?" He said, "Man," he said, "everybody thinks that we need to be like you and find these treasures and move off to a Caribbean island or something." And I laughed, and I told him why it occurred. He said, "You're kidding. You didn't find the treasure?" I said, "No, but I preserved my life, idiot. That's the whole point, But isn't it funny, after that long, that one person that used to be in the club even remembered that story from all those years back, that here that when I saw this deal that you guys put up, the Texas legend, I laughed to myself and I thought, yeah, some legend disappeared from the world. But you know what? At the end of the day, I'm not like I'm like everybody else out there that's got a metal detector. Maybe the difference is that I am extremely passionate, and I go out and I ask questions and I document and I keep that stuff, and I darn sure don't tell specifics about treasures where I go to the wrong people. And right now to this day, I have no idea who it was, but I lived through the experience. My family lived through it, and it was probably one of the best things I did. But here I am now, 20 some odd, 30 some odd years later, and life goes on. I guess 30, 35, 36 years. And it's amazing because I still hunt caches. And I know one of the things Mike said, I don't count piggy banks. I found several piggy banks full of money, but I have found 3 caches that I can talk about. There's 2 others that were I'm bound by non-disclosure agreements, but a little bit about those. The first one I found was back in 1986, of all things, and it was $28.58, but it was all pre-1900 coins. And the way that I found that was I actually got hold of old plat maps in the county, and I located a name of an old settler. I wasn't even looking for coins at that time, or caches. And I went out to that property, and I kind of figured, okay, we got to be close to the creek. And I started looking around. And Mike, one of the things that you and I did the other day, I told you where those rocks were on the east side of that 40-acre field we were at. That were a cabin, and it actually, the one Mike and I were at, was a pretty historical cabin. And so the way I found this place back in 86 was I found where the cabin was by the stones that had comprised the chimney. Some of them had black on them still, and just a general location. Then I found the cornerstones of the cabin and stones in between. So this is probably it. And I started metal detecting, looking for relics and old coins. And I actually, I hit, how the old zinc mason jars go off? Well, I hit one of those, and the zinc was on the bits, but inside was that whole $28.50 pre-1900 coins, including some seeded halves and a lot of quarters, and even had a couple of, I think there was $6 as I recall. But once I found that, and this is really something I think that is important too for all the listeners to remember, is if somebody's on a site and they planted money in the ground, where there's one, especially if it's a small one, there could very easily be more. And so once I found that one, I thought, man, that is so cool. And my second cache was a little over a year later. And I'd gone back to the site several times, and that's the one, Mike, you wanted me to talk about. I was on that site, and Dorian, you would probably remember some of Charles Garrett's books that he wrote about.
Oh, yeah.
The people that would, on a fence post, they'd put a nail in and bend it over and cut it off so they could slip the wire off, right?
Right.
And so that's what I discovered on my second trip when I was hunting a cache, is I actually came across a fence post laying on the ground, the old barbed wire and everything still intact, attached to the post around it. And that one had two wires that were still intact, but hadn't slipped off or it slipped out of that bent over nail that was clipped. But all it was a 4-stranded barbed wire, and all of them had the clipped nails still in them and intact on the ground. I thought, oh my gosh, could this be? And it was probably 18 targets later, I hit a sound that an indication that it was coins and stuff. And when I dug down, probably right at a foot, I found the top of a white ceramic container jar, and it was destroyed. It was cracked and broken, but I carefully picked it up, and inside I saw silver coins on their edge and at angles and covered with dirt.
Wow.
And so,
what a thrill.
And so naive me, I start reaching in my hand trying to pull those coins out, That did not work, by the way. I mean, it's just really difficult to get them out because they were jammed in there. So I dug this urn up and got it. It took me probably an hour and a half to get it dug. The ground was a little hard, and I finally got it dug up. And I took it and put it in my truck and went back to the house and got it in. And I broke it on the way home. And when it broke, I stopped the truck because I didn't want anything going out the tailgate. And right then, there were two $20 gold pieces in about 2/3 of the way up from the bottom of this thing sitting there. And of course I had to grab those, right? They're gold. And I went home, and that one ended up being $323.81. God only knows why the penny came from, but every one of them was pre-1900 coins. And there was like 200 silver dollars back from then. And it was just, to me, that was incredible, and especially the two $20 gold pieces. And then the third one that I found that I can talk about was in 2003, and I still hunted a lot, and I hunted a few caches, but most of my time I spent in those intervening years accumulating information. So in 2003, I came across some information where one of the people, like what I mentioned earlier, where the Indian raids occurred, and these people died suddenly, and they were known to have been, he was a merchant, and he worked there in not Palo Pinto, in Weatherford, and he was a merchant, and so their family was massacred and killed by the Indians, and I went and I found where he lived. And I had to go through about 5 or 6 plat maps to get that. But once I did, again, I went there specifically looking to see if there would be a cache, because him being a merchant, now his business was not, he had one in Weatherford, and then he had another one west of Mineral Wells in Palo Pinto. And so I went to his house, and I hunted and hunted and hunted. And it took me 3 trips out there, but I found the other cache that I had found that I can talk about, and it was $180 even. And that, again, it was all pre-1900 silver coins. And that's the kind of stuff that's out there. You just got to research and be willing to find the story of people's lives, and what that requires is talking, not only looking through the newspapers. I'm sure you guys are familiar. What is it? Newspaperarchive.com.
Right.
And there's a lot of other sources out there. That's probably one of my favorites. And anywhere that I can get information I can research in person or online, that's my avenue of doing research. And I kind of like to refine it by talking to people. But nowadays, it's a little different than it was in the early 70s, where we still had people that were either alive in 1900 or thereabouts, or their children that would talk more. And one of the places I go now, believe it or not, is nursing homes. And there's still people that remember the old days in smaller towns. And those are actually the places I go when I talk to them, are the smaller nursing homes. But by doing the research and finding as much as you can about those people, you just have a better chance of finding the caches, if they were merchants or if they were killed suddenly, or if they were known to have money hoarding, and even if there was a story about it. And I'm sure y'all would also agree, both of you probably, is one of the big problems with cache hunting or treasure hunting, either one, is the stories over time, and especially the better known ones, the information is skewed horribly. And people will get information, they either intentionally or unintentionally will change some aspect, which makes it more difficult to overcome. Dorian, I know you understand that from some of the ones you've done. And one of the things that I differentiate about is I've got information on the larger ones, a lot of them, I say probably 30 or 40, but I think that I hunt more for the small ones, and I think that that's probably a more likely prospect, but it takes a little more thorough research, I think, because they're really nondescript people on the background of time, if you will. So you have to uncover what you can about those small caches. But on the other hand, when you go after the big ones, whether it's Spanish or the Knights of the Golden Circle or whatever, you really have to do research. Dorian, I know you have through the decades, and you're far further than I am with that.
Well, what happens is, at some point, if you keep researching, of course, Dennis, I'm preaching to the choir. You know this, Mike. You do too. The more you research, the better you get at it.
Yeah.
And when you start getting into decades of research, at some point you cross over a line, and you're not really a researcher near as much from that point on as you are a history detective.
Absolutely.
You spot clues. Like, for example, I was talking about the difference between the way my buddy John and I approached this, the Civil War site, right?
Right.
Well, I took about 100 artifacts out of that field before we lost our permission because the old lady died, and of course the nephew that takes over, was just how that goes. Anyway, I was able, by just a sheer weight of experience and knowing how to follow clues. It's too bad that I'm too old to have a career anymore, because I think I could be a pretty good detective right now,
Yeah.
But I was able to take most of the mini balls I found, and I can tell you which unit fired that mini ball. This was the 19th Georgia was using buck and ball, and they were positioned right there, and the balls, their lead that didn't hit somebody went into that bank right there, and then these guys over here, were using what we call Georgia slicks or infields, and that was the Second Tennessee, and it's really amazing because I actually got done and I had attributed probably 85 to 90% of those artifacts I found in that field to their specific units. And quite frankly, I kind of amazed myself, and I thought, did you really know you could do that? You know, and I thought, wow. And I thought, you know, it made it a much richer experience for me to be able, you know, to get that much information about those artifacts.
And you're absolutely right. It doesn't matter if it's Civil War battleground hunting or if it's campsites or whatever. When you go in there, or just coin hunting, or even cache and treasure hunting, when you go in there, you're recovering a once in a lifetime experience and history of any given item that you find. And again, I think I said something akin to this at the very beginning. This just astounds me, this hobby, because I look into that rich historical aspect of everything I find. It doesn't matter the heel plate that Mike found on this property the other day. It's not thick like a standard heel plate. So that led me to conclude, okay, this was a lady's heel plate. And I think that's probably right. And I'm holding it in my hand right now, Mike, and I'll be glad to give that to you next time we see each other Thursday. But you got to always question, or I do at least, is who was the woman that wore this particular item here, and what did she do? Because I'm sure, Mike or Dorian, I'm sure you've heard through the years a story of the heel plates that the ladies of the evening wore. And
I actually haven't heard that story. No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, let me share with you. Maybe I know the wrong people. I don't know. But my understanding is that, and gosh, that's been decades that I've heard that. And it would make some sense in the Western days, in the Western towns, that ladies of the evening primarily wore the heel plates that had hearts on them, and that the way that the cowboys would find those individuals would be to follow the trail of hearts, and to and if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that perhaps that's the way, you know. But I thought everybody knew that. But that's a good example. Well, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard that for a long, long time. That from some of the older folks, you know, that probably one or two of them might have been a lady of the evening. I don't know, you know. But you know, a quick story, if you will, if you don't mind me doing this. Back in '85, I inherited a house from my great aunt. She was a great aunt until she gave me the house, and she that house had 5 roof leaks and 6 live termite nests. It had some damage. I mean, it's bad, you know. And I redid that house. When I got there, it was full of stuff. She just collected junk. And I'm going to tell you now, keep in mind that I've been metal detecting and treasure hunting for a while, right? And this house was given to my great aunt by Mayor of Fort Worth, and she was a lady of the evening, and whatever it was she was doing for this mayor, he gave her a house for it, right? And so I redid this house. It took me 17 months. Every day I was off from the fire department. I was there from when I got off till 10 p.m. And I started out in the kitchen throwing stuff away. And great treasure hunter that I am, I kept encountering, I threw away over 300 Fiesta-ware plates of various kinds. The old enameled wood-handled utensils those were hot back then. You could sell for, you know, several dollars a piece. And my aunt, in the drawers in the kitchen, I found all these aluminum foil packets with tape or with tape and string and stuff inside of them. And I thought, you know, being a great detective and great treasure hunter, I started checking them, and every single one of them in the kitchen was just that junk. And so I had just been up in Alaska for 45 days hunting and fishing and prospecting when I started this project. I flew back from Fairbanks on July the 5th of '85, and that's when I started on this house. And it took me about a month, and it was hot in the summertime, no AC. So all these things had string and tape in the kitchen. As I progressed through the house, I threw stuff away. I encountered costume jewelry. One in particular was kind of silver with a big old chunk of glass. Threw that away. And I kept encountering all these aluminum. And y'all know the science story about Pavlov's dog, where you ring the bell and he'd salivate. Well, I was that way with these packets, right? And because I got programmed in the kitchen throughout the rest of the house, all the clothes and stuff I threw away. And within the rest of the house, I kept encountering all those aluminum foil packets that were filled with string and tape, I'm sure. And I get totally through, and I've redone that house completely. And when I got redone, I was single at the time, and I had a date with a young lady. And before I went, it was raining, and I said, okay, I know there's an umbrella in this house. And I went in, and in the closet, I see this umbrella. I thought, I don't know where it is. It's either my great aunt's or it's a girl I've dated or something. And I get it out, and I test it, and out falls an aluminum foil packet. I said, well, uh-oh. And I thought, well, that's either more of the tape and string that my great aunt did, or it might be some dope, some girl that I dated had. I didn't know it. And so I got to Susan's house, the lady I was going out with, and I told her right before we left, I said, look, I need to go to your restroom for just a minute. I've got this packet, and I need to flush some dope down your toilet, if that's what it is, or just throw it away in a trash can. She says, okay. So I undo the foil packet in the bathroom, and inside is $380 in brand new 1959 $20 bills.
Oh, wow.
And the idiot lamp went off in my life, in my head. Great treasure hunter that I am, I was easily outmaneuvered by stupidity and making the assumption, because I found all these in the kitchen and they were tape and string, and I made the assumption that it all was. And so that's pretty bad. And there were literally hundreds of these packets in that house.
Wow.
In pockets, on shelves, in drawers. I'm confident that I threw away probably close to $30,000 cash by just not being willing to slow down enough and open up a simple aluminum foil packet.
Yeah.
So one more comment to that. If I go forward one more year, I'm going through some of her stuff, because after all, I'm a historian and a great metal detectorist, by the way, a legend to some people. And then I open up this bunch of paperwork, and I discover there's a receipt from the insurance company right there from 1936, insuring a 4.5 carat solitaire diamond ring in the platinum setting. And I remember that silver looking ring with that big chunk of glass in it. And I never thought it might be platinum. I thought it was junky costume jewelry, and I threw that away as well.
Oh.
And looking back, when I did it, I thought, boy, those the pieces of metal that are holding the jewel or the glass in, I said, those look real, but it's junky looking silver, and it went in the trash can. So it's really a good object lesson, because no matter how good you get in this business of whether you're coin hunting, treasure hunting, battleground hunting, you really have to be knowing what you're looking for. And I tell folks that get into doing cash hunting, my opinion in this is that when you've got a great lead on something, it may or may not be true. And I seek to disprove it as much as I do to prove it. And I'll let the facts stand however they fall, And in this case, in that house, it was the equivalent of a treasure hunt, because she had quite a few interesting things that I still have a few now, but I knew they were worth something. But like a lot of people, I overlooked what should have been an obvious thing. That detective in me should have said, the kitchen, I can see all those being strings and tape, but once I get past that, what are all these others, and why do they keep showing up? But I didn't do that. I threw away thousands of dollars,
And this is a great object lesson for our listeners. We talk. You'll hear us old geezers talk from time to time. We'll talk about having paid our dues or paying our dues. Dennis just described to you a big payment that came due on his dues.
Yep.
And he had to pay it. But the point was, he didn't say, "Oh, I'm no good at this. That's it. I'm out of here. I'm going to take up casino gambling or something else." He didn't lose his passion for detecting. He learned from his mistakes, and he went on to further successes.
And that's really an exceptional point, Dorian, because somebody out there, you're going to make mistakes no matter what. The second cache that I found that I was describing earlier, it might not have been there, but it was through due diligence and then remembering the old story. I don't know how many caches are done that way, but find that old fence post with those nails bent over and cut off. You read, and there's so much out there. I love to read the books.google.com. Now they do it a little differently, but I've got hundreds of books that were written 1800s and before that I was able to download back in the day. Now you can get them printed online, like through Indiegogo, which you can still get them real cheap that way. But I love to read those because there's one little nugget of information. It's kind of like the ORs you were talking about.
Yeah.
Y'all were talking about research like a pro. There's those one or two or three little nuggets, and once you get that, it might even be a newspaper article after that ties that in to more information that's usable. Yep. And so that's part of this game too. If you're willing to put in the time, especially for cache hunting, I've got numerous leads that lead to nowhere. But on the other hand, something as happened in this case with this gold cache that I'm looking for now. I ran into one person, that 82-year-old grandma, and just asked her, "Do y'all have anything else?" And when she said yes, it might have been nothing. But in point of fact, by doing that, by thinking outside the box and just talking to somebody, a total stranger, it revealed what I believe is going to be the end result of me finding that cache.
Exactly.
And I'll point out, too, I made the comment earlier, I knew I was going to win that car that I won. The house I just described, redoing it, it won first place in the United States, beating out over 3,000 homes in a Mechanics Illustrated magazine back in my twin self was featured back in 1987 in their issue. And there's been times where I know, and I think that it's kind of like what you were talking about earlier. When I go to any site, I listen, and I believe I'm going to find silver and something. And I told Mike, one of my treasure hunting buddies through the years, when he was around, I'd tell him, I think I'm going to find, we go coin hunting in this instance, I think I'm going to find a standing Liberty quarter. And I found probably 12 or 13 of them by predicting that way. And I don't know how it works. But I go into every time that I go, no matter what mode of metal detecting I'm doing, I look with it in anticipation of finding the best I can find right there. And what I think it does, truthfully, I think it causes me to focus more on, looking and hunting and being observant by anticipating and anxious for that next signal. And as stupid as this may sound to all you listeners out there, I actually enjoy every single dig that I do, because until we dig it and uncover it, we don't know what it is. We think we do from the tones or from the VDI or whatever that the machine's telling you. But at the end of the day, we still don't know until we get it out of the ground. And that loops back to that historical romantic side aspect, So
Dennis, would you agree?
Part of it.
Would you agree that the failures on digs, the digging the pieces of junk or whatever, just make the great finds that much sweeter? That without failure, you wouldn't have any contrast, would you?
No, not at all. And even then, here's a cool idea. Even the failures, what do you have your pouch for? I carry a pouch, right? And at the end of my hunt, I empty that pouch out, and the failures of the aluminum pull tabs or aluminum or tin or copper or brass or lead go into my little buckets that belong to each other. And those failures magically, at the end of about a year of hunting, they magically transform into several $100s typically. And I can buy more metal detecting stuff with it, right?
Right.
So even the failures can actually be productive and actually turn into something cool.
Good
But
point.
you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah, good point.
Mike is sure being quiet over there.
No, I'm just listening.
Mike?
Taking it all. I'm sorry, you cut out for a second. No, I'm just listening. I'm enjoying it. Keep going. Just keep going.
Okay.
It's going great. Or
Mike,
anytime.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're almost at 2 hours. Anytime you guys are done, we can always get you back on, but we can keep going. Didn't I tell you it'd go quick?
I'm good.
You did.
I'm good.
I'm fine for right now.
Yeah.
Okay, good deal.
If
Why
you hear
don't you guys take a real quick break? Well, I mean, Dorian doesn't need much of a break, but there are a few things I want to say. Not even metal detecting related, but the stuff I'm reading right now about the coronavirus and stuff. If you know, everybody out there, you should stay in if you can. I know that's not an option for a lot of people, but if you can, stay in, wash your hands. Please don't go out and be crazy buying everything up. Think about the elderly, the children, things like that. There's no reason to go buy 6 months worth of toilet paper. You know, everything that's going on. Think about your neighbor. Think about the children in the neighborhood, the families, everything else. You don't need to stockpile stuff like that. I seen something that I thought was really great. All these restaurants are closing down, even fast foods closing their you can't even dine in a lot of these places. If you see a truck driver pulled over trying to get a meal or something, offer to take them through the drive-through, because that's where we'll get into trouble. If we can't get our food and supplies delivered, we're going to be in. That's when the real trouble hits. So if you can offer a truck driver to run through the drive-through for them, think about it.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
If you can, check on elderly neighbors and stuff. Everybody needs to do their part. And I know there's a lot of jokes going on. Some of them I think are funny. I think it's blown out of proportion, but we could all help out a little bit in any little way. And I just thought I'd give you a break. It was kind of on my mind, Dennis. And but back into it, I'm enjoying it. You just keep going, and when you guys are tired, we'll call it a night.
All right.
But we can get you back on several times. I know Gypsy and Amanda would love to get you on sometime. So you go right for it.
Yeah, you didn't tell them I was a legend or anything, right?
Oh no, I did.
Okay.
No, after hunting with you, I've told everybody you're a legend.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah.
But here, before we get back to that, I'd like to make a couple of comments about this as well, about this current situation. You know, a good example, everybody's really upset about toilet paper of all things, you know. In the absolute worst case scenario, the Romans back in the day, you know, they actually had a sponge on the end of a stick to use, and then dumped it down in high strength vinegar was one of the things they used. So as bad as that may sound, it's not a really bad emergency. Our ancestors used newspapers of all things, and there's corn cobs. I mean, there's lots of things, right? And in some parts of the country where they don't have any paper at all, they wash their hands a lot. But there's also, I know Dorian has some knowledge, and Mike, you and I briefly talked about this the other day. I'm kind of a primitive survivalist from the standpoint of I know what edible plants are. But if you go on Amazon right now I'm actually holding one. I dug it out of my bob or a bug out bag is what we call it. Yeah. But this thing is a pocket guide for edible wild plants. Now that may sound outrageous, but if worse comes to worse, and it possibly might, this is a great pocket guide that folds out that shows you examples of plants in America that you can eat. And there's also medicinal plants available, and they're both who are they put out by right there? If I can get it in my bifocals, Waterford Press and Pocket Tutor Guide. But as simple as that sounds, you will, if you explore that a little bit, there's more food out there than you shake a stick at, and you can eat pretty well just by having something to go by. And there's probably people around your neighborhood too, or your area, not neighborhood, but in your area that know what plants are edible in there. And so the biggest thing with any kind of event, if this coronavirus ends up being the baddest dude to ever come down the pike, very first thing is you have that determination to live. And then secondly is you gather up as much information as you can. And as simple as it sounds, rice and beans form a meal. You've got protein, you got carbs on there. You add a little bit of greenery, you're good to go. Yes, sir.
Hey, one little qualifier, try to get whole grain brown rice, not white rice.
Absolutely.
White rice has had most of the good stuff taken out of it.
You're right. And you're right. I did not qualify that. But
yeah,
people can survive out there, and that's kind of the main thing,
You know, Dennis, I've read across an incredible story. You know, when the United States bombed Japan with the first nuclear bombs at Hiroshima, there were 2 hospitals that were in the blast zone, and they survived. The director of one of them was standing looking out the window right at ground zero, and he died. But the 2 hospitals were the only hospitals left, and so they were, getting a lot of patients. And this doctor that took over, the number 2 man that took over in this one hospital, he put all of the staff and all the patients on a whole grain brown rice and miso soup. Miso is a fermented seaweed. He put them on that diet, and both these hospitals were right, in the intense part of the fallout zone, the bad radiation. And in the other hospital, people got terribly irradiated, terrible radiation burns, lesions. They died from radiation poisoning. In the second hospital, with everybody on the special diet, not one single person showed any signs of radiation poisoning. And they were surrounded by hot fallout.
Wow. And that's amazing. And it really goes to show, which I think is absolute truth, that we are what we eat. And that if you do eat the proper foods, you'll increase your health and make yourself bulletproof, especially what you just shared. That's amazing. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and 2 things that let me tell our audience. I've already told our belly cutting group 2 little things that you can do to help fight this virus. Find a good echinacea product and take plenty of echinacea over the next 2 or 3 weeks, because it boosts your immune system tremendously, makes it harder for you to come down with viruses. And stop eating anything that has processed sugar in it during this so-called pandemic, because sugar acidizes your blood, and when your blood is acid pH, viruses grow very easy in your blood. When it's slightly alkaline, they don't. For those of you that, are actually interested in this, go online, do a Google on alkaline foods, find out what alkaline foods are, and put those in your diet for the next few weeks to help keep your blood on the alkaline side, and you'll have a really good chance of not getting this at all.
That's a good point, Dorian. He's right. Every bit of the research I've ever done indicates that as well and supports that. Great point, Dorian.
Okay, are you ready to get back into this wild and woolly treasure hunting here?
Sure.
I got something I want to ask you about.
Okay.
We were talking about that fascinating story, which I'd never heard, about the heart and the ladies of the evening, and you got me thinking about ladies of the evening, not in a improper way, I hope, but I got thinking, Dennis, you're from Fort Worth, and Fort Worth has the nickname of Cowtown. And it got that. Tell people how it got that nickname.
Well, believe it or not, I don't know, or maybe I know and don't remember. How's that? That's what I'm claiming.
All right.
Other than the cattle coming through here,
that was it. It was.
Okay.
When they brought the railroad in, it became a terminus for cattle drives. So,
Right.
big cattle market. But, cowboys are wild and woolly guys, and they wanted to blow off steam. And a certain little area of Fort Worth developed into something called Hell's Half Acre.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Now, what I want to ask you is, in all of your detecting experience there, did you ever hunt anywhere around the old Hell's Half Acre properties?
Yes, and it's not where most people think it is. A lot of people want to put it up north by the stockyards. It's actually on the eastern central part of downtown Texas. So the opportunities to hunt that have been when they have come in there and been redoing the city streets and lots and building. And at those points, there have been a lot of us from the club that have come in there and found some spectacular finds from those days.
Give us a few. Give us a few. By the way, you said downtown Texas. I think you meant Fort Worth, didn't you?
Yeah, downtown Fort Worth. Yeah.
Okay.
That is Texas, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Okay. Give us a few examples of some of the great finds that you saw come out of that area.
Well, the one that pops up right off the bat to me, it might have come just on the edge of Hell's Half Acre down there, but it comes to mind immediately. Fort Worth is known for what's called the White Elephant Saloon, and it was where a famous gunfight between Luke Short and long-haired Jim Cartwright. But anyway, that's up, and it occurred right outside the White Elephant Saloon. And nowadays, that's on Exchange Avenue, right where the cattle pens were on the north side of Fort Worth. Tremendous amount of history. But down there around the Hell's Half Acre, it had been rumored for many, many years that there was a Black Elephant Saloon. And there was a token that was found now. It's probably been about 6 years ago down there. That is the first and only known the only known token from that Black Elephant Saloon. That token is probably worth about $2,500 to $3,000 right now.
Wow!
So that's and we even had a historian that's an expert, so called, that came to the club meeting and said, it's not known if there's a Black Elephant Saloon in existence. And the gentleman that bought the token from the guy in the club that found it said, well, I hate to differ with you, but let me show you this token. Here's proof that Black Elephant Saloon was indeed in existence. Beyond that, that was south of where the actual fort was. And there had been pistols that had been found down there. There's one there. Of course, they have environmental damage, right? And many bullets. There's been all kinds of military recruitments from Civil War time. Fort Worth was founded in 1845, and it was an actual fort. And so those cowboys were also joined by military folks there at the fort as well. And so there have been, myself, I have found a banjo tightening, what do they call that? It's got an eagle on one, the military eagle, and then it's got the tightener for the drum head of the banjo. I found part of a Colt Dragoon pistol there. Oh. It was just the handle, and coming up, someone had hit it with probably heavy equipment, would be my guess. Everything you can think of that would have existed back in those days has been found. Old city coins, or for coinage, it's whatever. There were 2 gold coins that I'm aware of that were found down there when a street was torn up, and they got down a little bit below where it was. But what that was, actually, it was field dirt. I don't know if it was from the original Hell's Half Acre or not, because I kind of think for that it came from a large-scale fire on the short south side of Fort Worth from about 1910 or 12, and I think they used that as field dirt up where they were working. But there's been a lot of stuff found there. Unfortunately, it's all covered over. I know, Dorian, that you're a big fan of researching the the Knights of the Golden Circle and Knights Templar and stuff. And just north of where Hell's Half Acre, one of my most favorite finds, we had a lot that was that had been cleared off in preparation for building condos up right on the bluff of Fort Worth, and we had probably 12 people from the club that were searching, and I kept getting a signal in one specific area. I found a 22 period military coat buttons in this one little area, but I kept getting this one signal, and it was at about a foot down. I found this brass buckle, and the buckle, it's like a hammered face on it with lots of little dings, and it's got some scroll work on the outside, and it's got a cross on the inside of all that scroll work and the hammered brass. That cross was still red with a kind of a resinous material, if you will.
Yeah.
And it took me 3 years to find out what that cross was, and I don't remember the gentleman's name that told me, but he posted a photograph of one that was not exactly, but it was similar. And I sent him a picture, and it was obvious from the feet on the backside and everything. It was 1800s. And ended up, he told me that this was a Knights Templar belt buckle, circa 1840 or so. And that probably is my favorite find that I've taken out of the old fort area right in there.
Yeah.
And I'll send you a picture of it. You know, if you can shed any other light, that would be cool. But what really interested me was...
Excuse me, Dennis, did the cross have 4 equal sides?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Knights Templar for sure.
Well, and the thing that and maybe you can verify this, because what he told me, he said that red resin material in there was that the high priest mixed his blood with tree resin and then inlaid it to the cross. You got any knowledge about that? Because, I mean, it's red till today, whatever it is.
The Knights Templars were a very occultic organization. They were secretly, unbeknownst to the certainly the lower-ranking members of the Golden Circle and most of the Inner Circle, they did not know that the Knights Templars were actually controlling the KGC, and that those caches were never intended to start a second civil war. Because the Templars have been gathering treasure caches for the last 3,000 years, and they have probably 30 or 40,000 treasure caches around the world now. So, okay, so yes, they were an occult organization. They did human sacrifices and other things, and if you go online, you can find an organization called the Knights Templars online, but that's not the Knights Templars we're talking about. Right. They're super secretive. They were the ones that tried to kill me when I tried to get into one of the big caches, the one I mentioned to you in Salado, Texas. And the last attempt, Dennis, I was driving by the Cincinnati airport on the interstate, and a bullet came through my open window, missed my neck by 2 inches, and blew out the back glass of my pickup.
Wow. And, you know, people don't believe that kind of stuff happens anymore.
I know. There were when I first mentioned that on the podcast, there were people that thought, you know, that I was just blowing smoke and telling stories. They didn't believe for a minute that I actually had people try to kill me over treasure.
Well, you know, really, right now tonight, the things that we've talked about, you know, I had back then, I still don't know who that idiot was that threatened to kill my family. And this is another example. So when you go to delving into places like that and treasure, whether it's Knights Templar or it's a Spanish treasure, there is death that can be associated with that stuff. Yeah, and you just don't know.
See, you cross a line, and this is the reason why ignorance kills. I knew what the Golden Circle was. I had contacts with Jesse James' grandson, you know, who was actually in the Golden Circle, and shared a lot of information with me. But I did not know about the Knights Templars until later. That information came along the way. I began to get little hints and bits. And by the way, Dennis, you have an organization that I'm sure you worked with that has a logo, which is a equal-sided, 4-sided cross, and it's red.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is
the Red Cross.
That is the Knights Templar organization.
Wow. That's amazing.
That's the real Knights Templars. The disaster relief, I'm told, is a cover for what they really do, which is to divert a good percentage of the money that they receive into their coffers. They were caught misappropriating or stealing $123 million at 9/11 that was dedicated to the families of the firemen and the police that were killed, and it had been put into their keeping, and they were caught trying to squirrel it away instead of paying it out to those families. And they said, oh, well, we were just saving it for future disasters.
Wow. I was not aware of that. Doesn't surprise me.
No, and see, the thing is, when you get into these, when you start getting into the treasures that have been hidden by religious organizations, you end up dealing with religious fanatics. And, there's even a verse in the good book that says they will kill you thinking they do God a service.
Yeah.
And that's what you run into. And that's what I'm trying to tell people. If you're going to hunt things like the KGC and stuff, you need to be educated on what you're getting into fully. Otherwise, you could really get hurt. You could really end up deeply regretting you ever got involved with it.
Yeah, you're right. And that really extends. I've had a 45 pulled on me in my lifetime and this is after a guy had given me permission to be on the property, and he did not like, I had uncovered a small box that had some jewelry in it. And, to me, I don't count that as cash, but I suppose it could be. But he ended up pulling a gun on me, of all things. And
wow.
So that really extends when you go out in the field looking, especially in the country, you best be prepared for the unknown that happens, and it could be everything here in Texas, from a rattlesnake bite to a mountain lion and or a bobcat, which is, I don't know, Dora, do you know I have a pet bobcat?
Yes, I do. And I have
I couldn't remember.
Dennis, I have a female cat that's half Kentucky bobcat.
Oh, wow. Well, in the wild, you just never know. Might be a Wampus Kid or even Sasquatch or Mike Squatch.
Mike Squatch, yeah.
I saw one of those last week or so. But my point is, but
I'm sorry.
I just going to say,
go ahead.
The point I was making is that you cannot go, no matter what you're looking for, you need to be aware of the dangers that are out there and aware that possibly there's dangers you don't even have a way to conceive of. And just be prepared to do the best you can. And again, I would reiterate, no matter what, whether it's coronavirus or it's hunting out in the swamp, you better have the determination you're going to live, because that's half the trick right there, is being ready and being prepared as well.
Yeah, I ran into the boys from Deliverance in the swamp at Jenkins Ferry. You remember Paul Creech?
I do.
Paul is no longer with us. He died died of Alzheimer's a few years ago. That's really sad.
It is.
Paul was a wonderful hunting partner, great individual, and a credit to the Texas State Police. I can't say enough good things about him. But Paul and I were hunting buddies, and we were going to go to Jenkins Ferry, and he got sick, couldn't go. And I had the hots to go, and I went by myself. Yeah. I got a mile back in there in the swamps, and I ran into the three boys from Deliverance. They were all,
oh my God!
They were obviously, their family tree didn't fork. They all three had mouths full of bad teeth. You could tell they were all brothers, related, and they were all carrying they were all carrying shotguns broken over. And all I had on me was a Bowie knife, my digging knife, Indian John Durham had made for me. And we're standing there talking about the weather and chit-chatting, and I've got my left arm draped over the hilt of that big knife, like it's on my left hip. So I just got my arm on it like it's resting there. And we're having this conversation, smiling at each other. And it really was all about who was going to kill who, because they wanted to kill me. obviously take my whatever I had, money, detectors, anything that value, and throw my body into quicksand back in the swamp. I knew what was going through their minds. You know, you have to be clairvoyant. You know, and so.
Oh yeah.
I'm kicking myself mentally, you know. Oh, why was I so stupid? Because Paul wears his gun when we go, you know, and I feel quite safe, you know. But I had really cunning fever, and I made an unwise decision, and I was in trouble. And you know, I'm talking to them, and at the same time, I'm saying to God, if you'll get me out of this one, I'll learn a lesson, never do this again.
Yeah.
And I noticed their eyes kept flicking towards my hand on that knife.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to realize they don't know if I can get that knife out and get it into one of them before they can get those shotguns up and kill me.
Yeah.
And it came to me something that I'd been told by people that were knowledgeable, that the swamp rats fear a knife worse than a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought,
me too.
Yeah, I thought that's what I'm seeing here, you know. And so we had that tense standoff the whole time, smiling, just chit chatting. And finally, I realized none of them had the courage to go first, you know. And so my life was spared. They went their way, and I went mine. And thank God for His mercy and in protecting a fool.
You bet. And you know, I'll tell you, because when you speaking about that reminded me, I spoke earlier going to Alaska, and that was back in '85. Now, I spent 45 days up there, and I was 32, I think, at the time, and I was, you know, worked out all the time and hosing testosterone everywhere, and I practiced for 1 year and a week, and I was going to kill a grizzly bear with a bow and arrow. And the third day in country up there, I had an encounter with a brown bear that was about 4 feet tall on all 4 feet, and the head is about as wide as my waist. And he terrified me, and I was unarmed. And I said, you know, to heck with Fred Bear and his killing that brown bear behind the rock stuff that everybody's seen. And the next day, I bought a 45-70 saddle gun, and that was only because no one had a cannon to sell me. But I spent 11 days up McCombs Plateau in Alaska on horseback, which is another story in itself. But what I wanted to relate to it is I grew up with a guy, and he left when we were 21, and he was a guide up in Alaska. And he really gave me this profound piece of advice that I apply to my metal detecting career, is that when you're in bear country, sometimes they're 4-footed, sometimes they're 2-footed, but you better always have the ability to stop the bear, period. And I took that to heart. And once I've had my license to carry since '95, but you can't stop there. Again, it's that preparedness attitude. I've had lots of exercises. I was on a security team for our church, and our gun instructor that we had on team was he was on the presidential detail for Clinton and Bush Sr. He was one of the guards that they had there, and he's ex-military SEAL, I believe. But regardless, he shot me more times with paintball than you shake the stick, because I wasn't quite prepared enough, and he knew it. But the only time in 46 years that I've ever had where I felt like I was in real danger happened on the north side of Fort Worth, and I got hemmed up by a guy, and he was a crackhead, and he came up and he says, "I'm fixing to take your stuff." And, you know, I thought, "You're an idiot. I got a 3-foot shovel with me." And he didn't know I had a Glock on my right hip, and it had a laser integral to the frame of it. And I thought, no, I'm not going to play with a pistol because I don't know what's happening. And I pulled that gun out, and I put the laser on, just started trading towards him. He said, "Never mind," turned around and walked off, and I got out of there. And my point would be, I didn't know if he's going to come back. But secondly, you know, the old adage, the best way to win a gunfight or a knife fight is don't get in that gunfight or knife fight. And so that's another point to be well taken. Anytime that you're out metal detecting, I believe we have a sixth sense that will keep us aware, if we are only attuned to it, that when we get in bad situations, that hair standing up on your neck, there's a reason for it. I think good Lord just gave us that ability, and I'm always cognizant of where I'm at, and I'm always armed because if a bear comes up, I'm going to be able to stop the bear. Hope I don't have to because of the paperwork, but regardless. But just one other little quick Alaska trip story. Up there, the prospecting, I went with a family that was a man, his wife, and they had 4 kids, ranging from little baby to about 7 years old. And I flew in with them. And I was trying to think before we started talking tonight. I could not remember the metal detector I had. It was Garrett, and I flew in with them because their plane produced nuggets a lot. And we flew in by helicopter. 10 days later, I stayed with them 10 days. And on the 10th day, the copters flew in their supplies. But on that trip, the guy kind of laughed at me, kind of like those guys that you were talking about earlier. What are you going to do on your trip with that 50-foot long shaft, you know? And maybe it wasn't 50, 45. But anyway, the guy kind of laughed at me. He said, "You think you're going to find any gold with that machine?" I said, "I think so." And he said, "You can keep all the gold you find." At the end of the 10 days, I had just over 8 ounces of gold nuggets that I'd found. And I gave him the machine. And, the only question he asked, he said, "Do you have any more batteries?" And that was back when, Garrett machines used the 9-volt batteries. Uh-huh. And I had one spare set, and that was it. And they stayed there long enough till they got down to 2 weeks rations and left. And that's really another good example. Everybody that goes hunting for gold, I said this to Mike when we've talked, I always point them towards Gold Rush. And you better look at what those folks are doing with heavy equipment to get out the gold they have. And you can still find it, but that right there is where research is really important for doing that. Because you can go into gold country, and sure, there's been gold there, but those people back in the day were not stupid. Another quick story, and then I'm going to probably have to cut it off. My wife's been looking at me. But the actor Chuck Norris and a local fellow, Jack Lake, they have a claim on the Yuba River just above where the American River hit it in California. And they flew me out there in 87 and 88 to do some consultant work for them because they had gold that was assaying out really high, but it was all micron gold, and it was adhered to pine tar resin. And so it cost more to separate the gold from the resin than the gold was worth. Huh. And so my job out there was to go out and try and find the mother lode for them. And they were operating an 8-inch suction dredge with an 11-man crew. And I got to stay there. The first time there, I was 14 days there on their claim. And the second year, I was there 20 days. And so part of that process, I went to get down there. You stopped the 4-wheel drive and hiked down the mountain a little over 6 hours to get to the river, cross the river, and there was their camp. And there was a plateau up above it. And back in the 49ers time, that plateau and the mountain that was next to their claim were worked by the Chinese immigrants that came in, and they took away roughly 35% of that mountain by hand. And I tell people, those folks were not, they weren't stupid. They understood where gold would be even back in those days. And they took a lot, and they took that mountain apart by hand. And somewhere I've got pictures of that. But up on the mountain, and this is really a great illustration, when you go hunting for gold in California or somewhere else where there's been active gold, I went up on the plateau that was north of the camp that Jack and Norris had. And up on the top of that plateau, it was completely covered with Chinese things that they had from cooking and sawing wood and opium pipes and opium containers and just plates. Everything you could imagine it would take for 30,000 people to live was up on that plateau.
Wow.
And I didn't tell Chuck Norris, when Chuck Norris gold prospects, the water's part and the gold jumps in his pan, right? But for me, it it was an amazing adventure. And I told them, I said, you really need to forget. And let me back up one step. They sunk right at $500,000 in that gold claim, and by the time I left, they had taken out only $50,000 worth of gold. And that shows you right there that it's a fun hobby to me, but you work your rear end off for a day's wage, day in and day out, looking for that stuff. But it's still there, and occasionally you find it. But I told them, I said, you know, if it were me, you've got a Bell Ranger helicopter delivering supplies, I would go up on that plateau and I would take everything I could find and I'd sell it, because there's more money up on that plateau than you guys are getting down here. And the reason for that was when the 49ers left, they didn't want to pack that stuff out. Going down that mountain I described was over 6 hours going down, but going out was almost 8.5 hours because it's sheer slope and you were grabbing hold of limbs to get down there. And that was after you got as far as you could with the 4-wheel drive. So no matter what you're doing, hunting for gold in the wild, placer gold or nuggets or even hard rock, there's other things there that can be considered treasure and might be worthwhile to find. So anyway, what else y'all want to talk about tonight?
Good advice.
Y'all are talking me out.
Good advice. Well, that's our job. That's our job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, you've been a fantastic guest. We really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
And I'd like to come back. Mike said I might want to. Sure, I'd love to come back. We can talk next time maybe about ground penetrating radar and witching sticks if you want. Shoot, I got them somewhere that I used to use. Maybe.
We
I
don't know.
Hey, a subject we've never broached at all with Mike, and Dennis would be good when we get him back. Let's talk about dowsing.
Okay.
I want to just give a little quick thing on dowsing.
Okay.
Real quick, when I was young, I thought that was a complete joke. I thought it was really hokey. And my grandfather, who, he was a kid in the Great Depression, grew up in that era. He told me stories of him going out and following the railroad tracks looking for coal to burn in their house. They were so poor. Anyhow, he was a builder, and my father bought the company in I want to say early to mid 1980s, until the day my father or my grandfather retired. And I found out later, my dad had used the same guy until he retired. Their well guy, that's how he dug his wells. And he said he was the best. My grandfather said he's the best well guy in the Dayton area, and he only ever used dowsing rods. That's how he found that water, and it says best in Dayton. So that really, really piqued my interest and completely changed my mind. I'll tell you what, if we're ever gonna talk about just dowsing rods, I want to get Keith Wills on too. And I can be quiet and you three can talk, because I think that would make for an absolutely fantastic show.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I had an opportunity to put 12 of the top dowsers in the country to test when I worked at Garrett. So I can share that on the show when we do that. Is Bill with us tonight?
Yes, he is.
Okay, well, we got to have a treasure story so he can go to sleep, go Betty bye. So are we about ready to tell Bill's treasure story?
Let's do it. Guys, I'm about wore out. We're running out of record time anyhow, so yeah.
Okay, all right. Here it is, Bill. When I worked at the Garrett factory, I met a good friend of Charlie Garrett's named L.L. Lincoln, and everybody called him Abe.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess his grandfather had founded one of the big insurance companies. I forget if it was Liberty Mutual or one of the big, Lincoln National Life. That's it, of course. And Abe had inherited. So he didn't have to work for a living. So, he went out and basically hunted full-time treasure, metal detecting, prospecting. So every summer he would go up to Idaho in his motorhome. He had a Winnebago motorhome, and he would go up there, take a dredge with him, and he'd dredge for gold on the Snake River. Well, in this particular trip up, he took a back road. Somebody had told him about a ghost town that was still standing that he could get to with the Winnebago. And he found it, and it was, and there was a saloon still standing. So being the treasure hunter that he was, he got out, and he walked into the saloon. And just as he got in the door, here come a guy. He'd seen his car parked outside. Guy coming out with a White's metal detector in his hand. And guy told him, he said, I've already checked the place. He said, nothing here. And Abe told him, he said, well, I think I'll just look around for a while. So the guy was kind of curious, who this old geezer was. Abe was probably as old as I am now then. And he watched him, and Abe just looked around the room, and he noticed in the middle of the area where the gambling games had been, there was a Pharaoh table that had been made out of about inch-thick boards, laid horizontal and then trimmed into a circle, so the table was about 5-6 feet diameter across the top, and it's set on about a 12-inch square wooden pedestal, just made out of boards, and it had been knocked over, and it was laying on the floor, and it had kind of a little bit of a semicircular cutout where the dealer had sat. So Abe got looking at the top of that table as it lay there on the floor, at an angle, and he saw that there were cracks between the boards, and he noticed the crack between the boards closest to the cutout where the Pharaoh dealer had sat was kind of worn in one spot. The edges of the boards were like worn and a little bit polished. So he got suspicious, and he went down to the bottom of the table, looked at the bottom of that square pedestal that is set on, got fooling with it, and found a little trap door that opened up. And when he opened up that trap door, there were something like 13 gold coins inside. The dealer had been skimming, when he pulled the winnings towards him, he was skimming coins out of the winnings by letting them drop down through that crack into the hollow pedestal of the table. Well, something had happened, obviously, because there were coins in there that he never had gotten out. And the guy with the whites had never thought to check that. But see, then Abe was a professional. I learned some things from him. So then he walked on back to the rooms that the saloon ladies used to entertain their customers. And here was a room that had old faded wallpaper on it and the springs of an old bed with a brass, old corroded brass headboard and footboard on the bed. And he got looking real close, and he saw just about what would have been the height of the mattress, the top of the bed, if somebody laying down. He found a tear in the wallpaper, just a small tear, hard to see. And it happened to be right over a knothole in one of the pine boards that were underneath the wallpaper. So he moved the bedstead, pulled it out of the way, and got down. And he found a little opening, almost like a mouse hole, in the baseboard at the bottom, right below that knothole that was covered by the wallpaper. And he pulled three $20 gold pieces out of there. So he found two small caches of gold coins. See, the ladies of the evening had been robbing their customers, the one that used the room, and they would drop the coins that they managed to pickpocket or whatever. They would just drop them down that through that hole, and of course make some kind of noise or talking or something so that the customer wouldn't hear the coins hit the floor behind the wall's bottom. So anyway, sometimes just really exercising good powers of observation can put a nice jingle in your pocket.
Wow. That's a great story, Dorian.
Thanks. Well, I hope Bill thought so, because I wouldn't want him to lose any sleep tonight. I want him to go. He can go have golden dreams. He'll probably be packing up and heading for Idaho tomorrow. Well, Mike, that's it. That's all I got.
All right, good job. Dennis, wonderful show. I had a blast, enjoyed listening to you. We'll do it again. I will be seeing you, Gypsy and I will be seeing you Thursday morning. I'll get a hold of you and we'll see range of time and everything. Dorian, great job. Thank you, guys. It was fun.
Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, Dennis, while you're hunting on Thursday, we'll be trapped behind floodwaters here. We got 3 or 4 inches of rain coming in on our creek. I'll be thinking about you. But
all right,
I'll tell you what, Dennis. I've been doing some research with Gary Persinger. That found all the mini balls and the. But
yeah.
Oh, by the way, you don't know about his latest find. Hope Gary's. I know Gary's probably listening, and I don't want to give it away, but Gary sent me a picture, and he says, "I think I found a fire pit." I looked at it. My eyes got just about popped out of my head. He did not find a fire pit. He found a mound that is full of artifacts, I'm sure, because he's already digging them around the edges, and he's already dug into the mound and started to hit the charcoal. He's found a mound where it looks like a huge amount of Civil War supplies were piled up and burned. And I think it's going to be a bonanza.
Wow.
So when
Amazing.
if I could ever get out of here, if it ever stops raining here, I just wanted you to know, I'm going to be over there cheering him on, man.
Yeah. And I'm still going to make it up and see you, Dorian. We need to do some hunting, brother.
Come on, man. If you can get here before they plant the bean fields, if they'll dry out a little bit, I've got some interesting places.
Cool. All right, gentlemen. Thank y'all for having me tonight, and I look forward to doing it again.
Oh, thank
Good night,
you for
Dennis.
coming on, Dennis. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And thank your wife for sharing you with us.
Yeah.
All right. Y'all take care. Thank you.
All righty.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Oh, Mike, let me give everybody a blurb on next week.
Okay, yeah.
We are going to have 2 more special guests, 2 guests next week. We're going to have a husband and wife hunting team. Larry and Diane Smith have been hunting for over 60 years. I had the privilege to meet them recently in Indianapolis, and Diane had brought display cases of her coins, the kind that make your eyes bug out, to show us, and my eyes properly bugged out, I guarantee you. So I'm really excited, about having a husband-wife team on the show, because they have 60 years of detecting experience.
Wow. And that's not combined, is it?
No, that's each.
Wow.
Yeah.
When they started, they had to have been using witching sticks. I'm just saying. That's ancient, brother.
Yeah, I thought I was doing good at 48 years, but wow.
Make you guys look like newbies.
There you go. There you go. Well, I imagine they have a few things they can teach us, and I'll see if we can't post some pics of some of Diane's UK finds. They have done a lot of hunting in the UK. I think they said they'd made 17 trips. And you know what? I shouldn't say they've done a lot of hunting. I should say they've done a lot of finding. Roman, Celtic, all kinds of stuff that just makes you drool. So anyway, be sure and don't miss that one. Tune in next week, because we should have another exciting time there. All right.
Awesome.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Thank you for tuning in.